Hello out there, Internet. Nick Cicada here. It's a beautiful day in City Park, and I'm here at the base of one of my favorite trees, and we're here to talk about a book that I got for my birthday. This is The Haunted Bookshop by Christopher Morley. So let's get talking about this quirky little bibliothèque mystery type of deal. So, The Haunted Bookshop by Christopher Morley. Now, I got this copy. I'm not sure if it's the first copy. It's probably not. But it's got a really nice finish. I like that diamond on the cover. I like the texture and consistency of the cover. It's got a very nice hardcover feel. As someone who's usually more so into paperbacks, this was the kind of book where just the title really drew me in. And I thought, this is going to be a book that I can really sink my teeth into. The Haunted Bookshop. Now, I thought it was going to be a supernatural story and it'd have some ghosts or something, but I was wrong. It's more so a thriller, focusing on a bookseller named Roger Mifflin. And I'm not sure if that's related to Houghton Mifflin or if it's just a weird coincidence. There's a book before this by the same author, Christopher Morley, called Parnassus on Wheels, but as far as I can tell, you don't need to read Parnassus on Wheels to enjoy The Haunted Bookshop. So this is kind of a sequel, but you don't need to read the first one to enjoy or get this one, because the first chapter opens up with an explanation of Roger Mifflin and his state of affairs and the sort of shop that he runs and all of that. Well, I will say, this is a really interesting book because it presents the perspective of booksellers in 1919, of the trade of information and how those sorts of things relate to the modern day. Is really interesting. This is still very much a relevant sort of book. I like the atmosphere and the texture and the detail with which Christopher Morley is able to paint this bookstore and everything in it, and the attitudes of people who sold books around 1919. I'm pretty sure this book is from 1919. Like I said, this is probably a reprint. No, actually, it looks like this is the first printing. It doesn't have the cover of the edition that's shown on Wikipedia. So I guess the one on Wikipedia is actually probably the second or third edition. This is actually probably the first edition here. And it's not valuable because the spine is a little ruffled, but yeah, you know, it's a darn good read nonetheless, so I don't care what condition it's in, so long as I get a kick out of reading it. Now, obviously, this is set during the interwar period, which I'm interested in. I recently read The Repair of Reputations from The King in Yellow, and I'm really interested in the speculative aspect of someone from the 1890s imagining the future 20 or 30 years down the line. And the picture of the 1930s and 20s it draws is pretty bleak. But The Haunted Bookshop, of course, being in 1919, is one of those really cozy interwar type titles, kind of like The Great Gatsby, but with even less drama. Just set during the little lull between what was termed the Great War and World War II. So there is a kind of charming naivety to something like The Haunted Bookshop, in that they had lived through a terrible war with many deaths, and they thought, this is the war to end all wars. And it was like, man, you haven't seen anything yet, because World War II is on the way, and that's going to fuck up the world and shape modernity into a whole new mess of 49 flavors. But at the time, it was a nice, calm, and turbulence-free period. There are so many people, and this is a disturbing line of thought among especially people my age, who believe, oh, people 100 years ago, like Christopher Morley, weren't analyzing the times in which they lived. And I think this is a dangerous line of thought, because all people in old times are incapable of fully analyzing the times in which they live until they can view those through retrospect. And I don't think that Christopher Morley is naive in that way. When I say that The Haunted Bookshop is naive, I mostly just mean that it's charming. I don't mean that Christopher Morley lacks insight. The Haunted Bookshop is a book with a lot of insight and a lot to say about the time in which it was written. Don't think that people of the past are stupider than modern people. That's an extremely harmful mode of reasoning that actually supports fascism, because if you don't appreciate and remember and respect the past, if you don't feel a line of connection to the past, which literature is great at doing that. It's great at reminding you where you came from and where you're going. And it's great at supplying you with perspective as a written record of people's thoughts, ideas, and so on. If you don't believe that you exist in time as much as people from the past did, then you do run the risk of repeating history. That's not something admirable, it's not cool, and it speaks to a level of temporal bias, where you assume that people of the present are automatically just smarter, more advanced, whatever, than people in the past. To clarify, that's not a position that I hold whatsoever, and I believe that books from 100, 200, 300 years ago can be just as insightful as anything written today. That's why I don't discount books like The Haunted Bookshop, and that's why I fucking read. 20s are a pretty fun decade to read about, because there wasn't that much going on, and we were relatively peaceful and prosperous. So it's a nice escape in that regard. It's a very modern book, a lot like Ulysses. A lot of people say that Stephen Dedalus is a modern character because he is an advertising agent or whatever. And I would say the same about The Haunted Bookshop. There's a lot of commentary in here about the function of booksellers as middlemen. They're basically the producers of the literary space. What they do is they operate as a connective tissue between the writer who creates the art and the consumer that reads the art, but they themselves don't actually do much of either. It's a really interesting profession to read about, because the way that Christopher Morley talks about the spread of information and the way that books affect the psyche, I wouldn't necessarily call that naive. Much of it is still very much applicable. The author Christopher Morley, he did live until the 1950s, so one can only imagine what he thought of World War II and the book burnings and all of that shit, because, you know, like I say, this is a really happy book about just loving books. I wouldn't say you'd necessarily enjoy this book if you don't like books. This is a book about books, and it spends a lot of its time just fetishizing bookstores as places, which I completely understand. I'm incredibly happy when I'm inside a bookstore and I'm surrounded by shelves and shelves of printed material, and I think, this is a beautiful place. This is an altar where I could spend all day and get completely lost in a book if I wanted to. And I would probably buy the book too if it was really good. And I found The Haunted Bookshop in just such a bookshop, and I read it, and it's a book for people who like reading. So it's a very specific sort of book, but I find it charming nonetheless. Now, as I said, during a period that's not the 20s, such as the 80s or the 40s, or right now, for instance, you do need entertainment to keep yourself happy and occupied during recessions, political lulls, etc., and periods when Latin fascism takes over. I believe that fascism has a tendency to destroy information, such as the Nazis wanted to do with the book burnings, obviously. Fascism also has a tendency to obfuscate useful information behind walls of completely useless information, like, as we call it politely, generative AI. The only possible function of generative artificial intelligence is to numb the minds of the mentally deficient, such that they become conformist idiots, and then carry out the will of a fascist regime. So I view AI-generated content in much the same way I view Mein Kampf, Triumph of the Will. It's not media that should be consumed by people. It's not designed to embrace any of the joy or happiness or meaning of living. It should only be perused maybe academically, in an academic context, and even then you're going to need to build up mental fortifications so that the terrible ideas contained therein in a book like Mein Kampf don't infect you and give you some really, really terrible ideas about the state of the world and things. Nonetheless, I do find the Haunted Bookshop very interesting in its analysis of the spread of information and the role that books play in disseminating that information. Like I say, it's a shame that this was written in such a drowsy period of the world, because I feel like if there was a more modern iteration of this, which analyzed the factor of psychological and ideological warfare, because wars aren't just fought physically. They're not just fought on the battlefield with mortar shells and rounds. They're fought with film, with literature, with ideas. Wars are ultimately a conflict between two ideas, two very different and ideologically opposed means of looking at the world. And the Haunted Bookshop, I feel like, doesn't do a very good job of considering the ways in which media can be utilized to poison the mind. Nonetheless, I'm not a pessimist. I do believe that the best idea will ultimately prevail in the end, whatever idea is the most conducive to the survival of humanity. The Nazis didn't win World War II, for instance, because the German army was consistently hopped up on a heady mix of methamphetamine and barbiturates, and you don't exactly get stable, level-headed, rational warfare out of that method. Now check this out. Here's an entire flock of magpies. Magpies are a bird that doesn't do much for the animal kingdom in general. They're known for stealing people's jewelry and watches, and one time they tried to steal the feed right from my chicken. It's not like the chicken can fly up and combat the magpies and take them to task about what little thieves they are. But the magpie is largely a parasitic species. Even its song is kind of irritating. And no one would find the magpie too appealing a sort of animal. Although I suppose to them they're very crafty little bastards. To a magpie, it's the ultimate rascal. These magpies are thinking about all the fantastic thefts they're going to commit over the next week or so, and how they're going to use the neighborhood up completely. And admittedly, they are pretty clever, but in the end, people do get sick of them. And I can only imagine what humanity will have in store for these guys once it realizes just how annoying they are and how little they contribute to a productive or meaningful natural ecosystem. Now see, that one is telling the second one that they're going to rob a bank this afternoon, and odds are they're probably going to do it. I've heard some people say that they've cut back their media diet lately, and I think this is sad. I don't think you need to cut back your media diet. I just think you need to have a healthy and balanced media diet. Like if you're, say, a vegan or a health expert, for instance, who wouldn't stuff yourself full of 50 bags of Flamin' Hot Cheetos in one afternoon, as I'm wont to do, admittedly, you probably wouldn't want to consume something like Mein Kampf. But something like The Haunted Bookshop, this is the sort of book that you can really sink your teeth into. This is not only a book that celebrates and is about literature, you can really tell that Christopher Morley knew what he was talking about, read a lot of books which he incorporates into the plot, and references constantly. Also, Christopher Morley is, for the most part, as far as I can tell, just on the basis of Roger Mifflin, who's sort of a character insert, a very progressive and liberal-minded person for the 1920s, or late 1910s, whatever the case may be. I do feel like The Haunted Bookshop feels more like a 1920s sort of story than a 1910s sort of story. Anyway, during sucky periods of history such as the one we're living through currently, I think it's alright to read a bunch. In fact, you should surround yourself with books and good ideas and stuff written by smart people like the Haunted Bookshop as much as possible, and just bury your fucking nose in them for months on end. You should be reading as much as humanly possible right now, so that if perchance there is an instance of ideological warfare on the horizon, your mind will be sharp and thorough and fast as attack, just like the Cake song goes. Now, this book is in the public domain currently, actually, because it's over 100 years old, and in it you get a lot of commentary on things that were considered new at the time, not just advertising. The main character, Roger Mifflin, takes a real stand against advertising initially. He says, "Oh, the reputation of my bookstore is its own advertising. I don't need advertising." And that's just such a naive, pure way to think about things. Because, man, if Christopher Morley had lived a couple more decades, I mean, he would have seen things that really would have probably made him a little more cynical. There's stuff in it about the onset of motion pictures that gives a fantastic insight into how people 100 years ago thought. They talk about the new Tarzan movie, and then one of the booksellers is like, "Wow, the Jungle Book is better than that. Rudyard Kipling has it all, and Edgar Rice Burroughs is a hack." And today, no one would argue that Edgar Rice Burroughs is of any less literary standing than Rudyard Kipling. But just the fact that these booksellers view the Jungle Book as superior to Tarzan is pretty interesting. I mean, I guess that would have been the view of pulp literature at the time, that the Jungle Book is high literature and Tarzan is just some lowly adventure, and that a movie of Tarzan is even worse than the book. That's just popular entertainment for the masses. Now, admittedly, Roger Mifflin, the main bookseller, doesn't necessarily adopt that viewpoint, but it's an interesting one nonetheless, because it says a lot about how movies were perceived 100 years ago and how Edgar Rice Burroughs was perceived. But anyway, since this book is in the public domain, I'm going to read the opening placard to you. "This shop is haunted by the ghosts of all great literature and hosts. We sell no fakes or trashes. Lovers of books are welcome here. No clerks will babble in your ear. Please smoke, but don't drop ashes. Browse as long as you like. Prices of all books plainly marked. If you want to ask questions, you'll find the proprietor where the tobacco smoke is thickest. We pay cash for books. We have what you want, though you may not know you want it. Malnutrition of the reading faculty is a serious thing. Let us prescribe for you. By R&H Mifflin, proprietors." And as the last sentence there would indicate, Roger Mifflin, the proprietor of the Haunted Bookshop, views his position as akin to that of a doctor, and what he does is strengthen the mind. That's his function. It's a very noble view of what people who run bookstores are ideally supposed to represent. Not always, of course, because we live under systems that are designed to break down the noblest among us. But this is an inspiring little tome, and I can't recommend it enough. I give the Haunted Bookshop 9 out of 10 stars. 1 point deducted for its naivete, but otherwise, it's a very fun read and incredibly engrossing. This is just the kind of book that everyone who likes books will want to read. So, yeah, I highly recommend it. If you like books, if you want to read about people who sell books and the way that they think, maybe not necessarily anymore, but around 1919, 1920-ish, then this is the book for you. A beautiful read and a valuable addition to my little collection and my shelf, and I'm glad I have it. Yeah. So that's my review of The Haunted Bookshop by Christopher Morley. I've been Nick Cicada. Until next time, never forget to see the beauty in the world around you, because it really is all around. It's a very pleasant day out today. Spadow.